Today is October 30, 2018, and we are at the home of Raymond Robert Leali, date of birth July 18, 1944. We're at his home in Granville, Michigan, doing a Veterans History Project interview. This is under the auspices of the Library of Congress, Washington, D.C. And my name, as interviewer and videographer, is Wallace J. Erickson. I'm a volunteer interviewer working with the History Department at Grand Valley State University, Allendale, Michigan. Ray served in the U.S. Marine Corps Reserve, February 1963 until December 1968 as a combat engineer with a Marine Reserve engineering company in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Ray, I wonder if you would state your full name and date and place of birth.
Okay. Raymond Robert Leali, born July 18th, 1944.
How do you spell your last name?
L-E-A-L-I.
Thank you. Ray, you were telling me that you were raised in Matawan, Michigan.
Yes.
What did your father do?
My father was a tool and die maker.
Did he work there in Matawan, or?
No, he worked in Kalamazoo.
I see.
At National Water Lift in Kalamazoo.
Oh, yeah.
I had good parents.
A tool and die maker, then.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Did you live in the country or in the city or the town of Matawan?
Country.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Lived on 5 acres.
Mm-hmm. Did you go through high school there in Matawan also?
Yes, I did. That's where I went through high school, was Matawan, Michigan.
Okay. When did you graduate? What year?
Graduated in June of 1962.
62. How many brothers and sisters did you have?
I have one sister.
Okay.
Younger than me.
After high school, what did you do?
I knew I wanted to proceed with veterinary medicine, but I also was interested in the military. And I wasn't sure which I wanted to pursue at that point in time. So I worked in a plastics factory where they would make different molds of different plastic items for General Motors while I was trying to determine what I was going to do. And I finally decided that I was going to take a rest from school and go in the military, but I didn't know if I should go in as a full-time commitment to the military or whether I should just do part-time, because I hadn't really made up my mind what I wanted to do, if I wanted to go to veterinary school right away or not. So I decided to join the reserves in the Marine Corps and at some point in time make up my mind if I was going to sign up regular or if I was going to pursue my veterinary career.
Why did you choose the Marine Corps?
Was always interested in the Marine Corps. I always felt that they represented the elite military as far as being involved in protecting our country. And I just chose it in that basis, I guess.
See. Let me also back up a little bit to veterinary medicine. I find it interesting that out of high school you pretty much had your goal set on studying veterinary medicine.
Actually, my interest began in elementary school. I was in 3rd grade when I first began to develop some interest in that. I witnessed the death of a Cocker Spaniel who got hit by a car on a street. Trying to come to me on a busy street, and so that aroused an interest in being able to help and work with animals and seeing the sadness that it brought to people with their pets too, and being able to help. So I pursued an interest in that all through elementary school and high school.
Did you know any veterinarians in Matawan?
I did know some veterinarians locally, yes, to talk with them, but I never really shadowed with one. as is quite common nowadays. But I never really shadowed with one, other than during my training at Michigan State University.
How soon after high school did you go through boot camp for the Marine Corps?
6 months. Graduated in June of 1962, and I enrolled in the Marine Corps in February of 1963.
Where did you go to boot camp? San Diego?
I went through boot camp at Parris Island, South Carolina. Had 13 weeks of boot camp at that time, with no leave.
What was your training like in boot camp?
Very interesting. After the first day, when we were befriended by the drill instructors as how they were going to train us, and signed the various papers, which in retrospect were probably release forms for the type of training they wanted to do for us, which was a little more corporate than perhaps would be considered nowadays, but reasonable, very reasonable. To take all of the raw recruits and in a 13-week period of time, train them to be responsive soldiers. I felt the training was very good, and not comfortable, but very good.
Do you remember some of the things you did in the initial days of your training?
Some positives and some negatives. The negative was that the second day that I was there, I had an event where the drill instructor came through the door, and he had been very friendly the day before, and I assumed he was going to be very friendly that day, so I just gave him a nod to acknowledge his presence and went about my tasks, to which he responded rather corporately. and I ended up being an example for the rest of the platoon at that point in time. And I never did that again. I remembered that rule of acknowledging his presence. Had great respect for my drill instructors. I had 3 drill instructors. Sergeant Nicolopoulos was the senior drill instructor. Corporal Ballou was a junior, and Corporal Malasson was the other junior. The other thing I recall is I was impressed by the drills of marching and the demands put upon us for perfection. And there was a lot of trouble with that. So I don't remember how many weeks into it, but I volunteered to be a squad leader. And so I became second squad leader, and I maintained that throughout boot camp, and therefore I was a PFC upon graduating from boot camp, of which there were only 4. 1 for each squad leader and 1 for the guide iron carrier. And that was very influential for me, because as a young man, you always wonder how you measure up with everyone else. I don't mean that in a prideful way. I didn't feel any pride with that, except in graduation. I felt pride in that. But in the sense that I made a commitment and determined to follow it through as others made commitments. And so I felt that it was an important step in my growth and development, as I felt the Marine Corps was in general, and very influential. And I attribute my time in the Marine Corps with my graduation from veterinary school, because it gave me forbearance, persevering attitudes, and not intimidated easily.
Were most of the other recruits about your age also?
Yes.
Recent high school graduates?
I was, yeah, most. There were a few that were older. There was a couple college students that I recall that came into that, but most were high school.
After boot camp, did you go to infantry training at Camp LeJeune?
Yes. We moved up to Camp LeJeune and went through infantry training at Courthouse Bay, part of I guess it was a little north of Camp LeJeune, and rather intense training. And the rifle training continued, and I felt it was very adequate training. Had a lot of experience with multiple weapons, grenade throwing, and all of those types of things.
How long were you in training, both boot camp and ITR, Infantry Training Regiment, before you came back to Kalamazoo?
A little over 6 months.
6 months. Okay.
It's a little more than 6 months. I don't remember how many days, but it was a little more than 6 months.
Mm-hmm. What sort of weapons did you train on in Infantry Training Regiment, or ITR?
ITR, Infantry Training at Courthouse Bay, and we had extensive training in weaponry. I had experience with flamethrowers, shooting bazookas, 50 caliber, 30 caliber, as well as assault training, hand-to-hand combat training, and a lot of weaponry that we worked with. Mm-hmm. I felt it was very good training.
How many weeks was the weapons training?
13 weeks. I believe that was 13 weeks also.
I see. So 13 weeks at in
That's
boot
why
camp
it was a little more than 6 months.
Right. 13 weeks at boot camp, and then also another 13
Yes.
at in the Infantry Training Regiment. Okay. Well, for both ITR and your boot camp, what do you remember about your instructors? You named them, all three of them, which I find quite amazing. But as far as their demeanor, and did that change over the course of your basic training?
Yes, it did, because our senior drill instructor, I don't know all the reasons why, but he was relieved the last 2 weeks, and we had a Sergeant Savage come in to complete that. He came in at night rather secretly and talked to us, because we ended up scoring we scored the best in the intercollegiate athletic events. Mm-hmm. My platoon scored the best, and also for marching. We got first place for that too. Just prior to his losing command. And so he came in and talked to us, encouraged us, and didn't give us the details of what had happened, but kind of wanted to say goodbye to everybody, because by that time in boot camp training, there's an allegiance that you feel to one another. Mm-hmm. That was developed. The other two, the junior DIs, they stayed on the same.
What was the designation of your platoon? Do you remember their platoon number?
Yes, it was Platoon 320 of 3rd Battalion.
I see. Thank you. Now, toward graduation then, Ray, you had some choices to make, is that right?
Yes. I had joined the Marine Corps Reserves. I was very interested in the 6-month program because I was still interested in veterinary medicine, but also in the military, and I did not yet know which direction I was going to go. Even as graduation was approaching, I considered very strongly to go regular. And that would be on active duty then? That would have been active duty, and because you could sign off the way that was set up at that point, you could sign off from being a reservist to go regular very easily. And there were several of reservists within the platoon. I don't remember the exact number. Not a lot, 6 or 7 perhaps out of all of us, but I didn't make up my mind as to stay with veterinary medicine until about the 3rd week before graduation. Had
you been selected or admitted to veterinary school while you were in basic training, or
not during boot camp, but I was from ITR.
I see.
I had applied to veterinary school while still in ITR.
Was this actually pre-veterinary medicine you would be studying for 2
Yes.
years?
Yeah, pre-veterinary was 3 years.
3 years.
And then the veterinary college was just under 4 years.
I see. And this was at Michigan State University is where you'd applied?
Yes, and also Western. I did a year and a half of pre-veterinary work at Western in Kalamazoo.
Okay.
All the rest at Michigan State.
No. So then just before graduation from ITR and the completion of your 6 months active duty for training, at that point you had decided then to pursue veterinary medicine?
Yes, it was 3 weeks before my graduation from boot camp that I made the decision that I would stay with veterinary medicine.
Okay.
I still had interest in the military. I thought maybe I would stay in the military or come back into the military as a veterinarian. And later on, upon my graduation from veterinary school, that was also an option. Not to stay in the Marine Corps, but the Air Force and the Army approached the graduating class of veterinarians for their corps, their veterinary corps. I considered strongly that as a potential. I was married at the time and expecting my son, and things just seemed to be too many things at once, and I didn't go in. I've since actually had some regrets on that. One of those things, not that I regret my career at all. I enjoyed my career, but I liked the military. And one of those things that you think back and wonder about, what if? What if I'd have gone that direction? And I think it would have still been good.
Let me ask you about, okay, after your 6 months for training and you're coming back as you decided to be a reservist in the Marine Corps, did you have a choice of what units to join as a reservist here in West Michigan, or?
No, I was, actually I had attended 2 or 3 reserve meetings before I was shipped to Parris Island. So I knew already the unit that I would come back and be assigned to.
So it was really the engineering company that sent you to basic training then?
Yes.
And expected you to come back, but you would have had the opportunity though to go active duty while you were in basic training then. Okay. Well, what company did you join then? What Marine Reserve outfit did you join when you came back to Michigan?
The engineering company, I think it was the 11th. Too many years, I don't remember the numbers on that. It was a good company, it was a good reserve unit. We were active. Oftentimes we would, on weekends, would build bridges or be in a remote area and instruct on explosives. Or we would actually be assigned to do some repairs for public service. We would apply and do things like that. So we did a lot of hands-on things, as well as we spent a lot of time at Fort Custer with everything from marching to rifle training to review of a lot of different military.
And the engineering company was in Kalamazoo, is that right?
Yes, it was.
That's where it was based.
I can't remember the street address. It was with the naval unit, the naval building, at the reserve.
Where did you go to your annual training duty, your 2 weeks of active duty each year? Do you recall where?
Little Creek, Virginia. And I was aboard ship for 2 weeks. They shipped us out. Camp LeJeune, went back to there.
And you went as a company then, as a unit from Kalamazoo. You went all together then. Okay.
And basically we'd be doing, except aboard ship of course, we would do a lot of the same things that we did on our weekends. We were building, tearing down, repairing.
When you were aboard ship, did you do a practice landing?
Yes.
Amphibious landing?
We sure did. Kind of an interesting experience. we practiced for the first week climbing up and down the nets into the landing barges. And then the landing barges, of course, would circle until they were all filled. And then they would line up in a line and we'd assault a beach. And I recall that the last day when we were actually going to make the assault, all the other days we practiced getting down the landing barge, and that was the end of it. Then we'd be retired for the day. We didn't assault the beach. But the last day we were going to, and it was a very rough day. And we were told that the president was observing this from bleachers on the beach. I don't know that for certain because I didn't see him, but that's what we were told, and that we had to do our very best. The seas were very rough, and we had already been cautioned that should you come off the ropes and fall between the ship and the landing barges, chances of survival were very poor. So that enhanced our grip on the ropes as we came down off the side of the ship. So there were 4 of us abreast on this particular net on this morning when we were climbing down the net. We were approximately 2/3 down the net. I was second from the outside, and then we looked down, and there had been a lull. A swell had come through and then had dissipated, and the barge was sinking. And we looked way down, and it was farther than the end of the rope at that point. And then all of a sudden, as we were proceeding to climb down, we heard the sailors in charge screaming at us to climb because a huge swell was coming in and the barge was suddenly coming up. It was apparent to me that we were not going to be able to climb fast enough to avoid this coming up, so I locked my arms in the net. And then I heard a scream, and the soldier next to me, whom I did not know, was knocked off the net. And I reached over instinctively and got a hold of his, part of his fatigues, I don't know where exactly, and swung him back into the net, so he grabbed the net. And when we got down to the landing barge, which we were able to proceed and complete that, he hugged me and wanted to know my name and who I was, and I did not know him at the time. He was actually from a Grand Rapids Reserve unit, and so I never saw him again after that. Years later, in 1973, I was already established as a veterinarian in Ada, Michigan, which is a suburb outside of the east side of Grand Rapids. And I had many insurance people that were calling me and contacting me wanting to insure my practice. And I knew that as a good businessman I need to have a good insurance agent. So I agreed to meet with this one insurance agent. And as I walked into the restaurant to meet with him, he was going to buy me lunch, as I recall. Lo and behold, it was this man that I had he said I saved his life. I don't really consider that necessarily. I just did what anybody would do. I just grabbed him to try to help him.
It's interesting. Going into the lunch, had he recognized your name?
He recognized, no, he did not recognize my name. When we saw one another, we recognized each other. I didn't have the beard at that time. And spoke very little insurance. Spoke a lot about what had happened to our lives since then. He became a good friend. And my complete insurance agent for everything I wanted to do with insurance until this time. Now,
would you like to give us his name?
Sure. His name is Bill Buchanan. He is the owner and operator of Buchanan Insurance Agency here in Grand Rapids. He's a private insurance man, so he's a broker. So he was able to lead me in many different directions. Trusted him completely. And it was...
well, he obviously trusted you completely too when he was falling from the net.
Yes, he did. I became his veterinarian, and we became friends, and our families became friends, and I was there for the marriages of his children. He always announced, embarrassed me just a little, but he always announced that he wouldn't have been there and his children wouldn't have been there if it hadn't been for me. So he's very complimentary in that regard, and he's a good friend.
Yeah, that's Debarking from a ship and getting on landing barges using the nets has always been a rather dangerous area, particularly, like you say, when the seas are high.
Yeah. And that's basically what we did for 2 weeks. Yeah.
What were your duties with the engineering company in Kalamazoo?
Well, initially, of course, I answered to authorities. I was a PFC, and so I tried to work diligently and apply myself. That's just the kind of person I choose to be. And I rose in rank there as a result of, I like to think, responsible working, and became, after a number of years, I don't remember how many years it was, I became a platoon sergeant there. And I was also an instructor. So I would give classes on building bridges, both the wood bridges and the mobile bridges, and also on explosives, working with C4 and TNT and some of those things that we would do on field maneuvers when we would have weekends and things. And I found it quite interesting. And I liked the time I had in the reserve.
How long did you serve in the reserves then?
Just under 6 years, the total. 6 months of that, a little over 6 months of that being active duty, and then the 2-week responsibility during the summer, and then the weekends, of course.
So that was basically the total contract then to be in the reserves was 6 years then, including your initial training.
I had signed it on 6 years, which actually I was supposed to get out in February of '69. Why they allowed me to leave at the end of December of '68, they gave me a little month and a half there, I'm not sure. That was never explained to me, only that it was available.
Where were you in your education at that point when you got out in December of '68?
It was interesting, I had just graduated from veterinary school also. I got out of veterinary school on the 7th of December, and I forget the date of my release, but it was the same month that I was...
So you had a lot going on.
I know it was December, I don't remember the day of which my release was.
A few years earlier, I understand you were married. So
yes.
When was that? And
that
who
would have
did
been,
you marry?
That would have been, I was in the reserves at that point in time, had been in the reserves. I was done with boot camp, and I'd been in the reserves about a little over a year and a half. And my wife and I were married when I was still in veterinary school.
What was the date of your marriage?
I'm sorry?
What date were you married?
1964, the 25th of July.
Okay. And your wife's name?
Marilyn.
Thank you.
We have now been married 54 years.
54 years. Just for the record here, Ray, regarding your Marine Corps service, were you ever in combat?
Was not.
I assume you never went overseas then, is that right?
Never went overseas,
Okay.
always stateside.
Right. And were you ever a prisoner of war?
Was not.
Were you ever wounded? Wounded in action?
No.
Okay. Did you receive any medals or special citations or awards for exemplary duty?
No.
Okay.
Just other than the rifle, sharpshooter.
Okay.
Would be that I always felt my father gave me advice before, when I graduated from high school. He said, you'll get out of it what you put into it, anywhere in life. And I always kept thinking about that when I was going through boot camp and the days when I wondered why I'd done that.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided
you get out of it what you put into it.
Yes. I decided that I was going to put into it. And that's when I volunteered to be one of the squad leaders.
Yeah. Do you recall any particularly humorous or unusual events, in either your drill training on weekends or boot camp?
Well, some of the games that the drill instructors played, I had a nickname just with the drill instructors. They called me Smiley because I saw the humor in a lot of the games that they made us play. Mm-hmm. So I got picked on by them quite a bit because smiling wasn't exactly the response that they desired to draw. So they would pick on me a bit from that, but it was okay. It was done tastefully, I thought, and with a purpose. But for example, I remember one reservist, no, excuse me, just one of my fellow soldiers in boot camp received a package from home, and it was a pound box of candy. And the drill instructor commented how nice that was, and that he didn't think, since it had been sent to him, that he should have to share it with us, because it was obviously his. The family bought it for him, didn't even know the rest. And so we all thought that was pretty good and was fair. And so he told the soldier to come up front and had him proceed to eat all of the candy right there in front of us, all at one time.
Did the Marine that got the candy, did he attempt to share it at all?
No, he didn't get an opportunity. So we all got the hint, and we all wrote home and asked our loved ones not to send us candy. Yeah. And the other event that stands out in my mind that I thought was fairly humorous was second or third day we had just gotten into boot camp. We were in chow line, and we sat down, we had chow, and one of the soldiers next to me, or recruits, raised his hand for the DI, and the DI came over and asked him what he wanted, and he said that he didn't like the food. And so the drill instructor looked at him and said, "You're right, I don't think you should eat it." So he took his plate away from him. And then when next time came around, we were to go to chow line, the drill instructor signaled him out and told him he didn't have to go, he could stay in the barracks. And it took about a day for him to change his mind about the food.
He got a little bit hungry, didn't he?
Yeah, and so I found that quite humorous too at the time. And so the drill instructor agreed with him, but so you had to be careful. It was very apparent that the drill instructors had been well trained in the psychology of working with a lot of the recruits.
Mm. Now, I suppose this question probably pertains more to after your basic training, but were there any pranks that you pulled on, or you or other Marines pulled on other Marines?
I personally didn't pull any pranks on them. Most of them I saw didn't have much confidence, and when they first came in, and some of them were pretty intimidated by a lot of things. So I was more trying to give them some support and try to help them a little bit. It was more my inclination. There were pranks played by others, but I never felt I wanted to participate in those. Not condemning them, just wasn't my way.
All right. Where did you take any photographs, either of your basic training or later in the Marine Reserves during your duty?
I did not, personally. My wife, now my wife, when I graduated from boot camp, which was South Carolina, Parris Island, they all lived in Michigan. My parents, mother and my father, and the young lady who was then going to be my fiancée, drove down to be with me at your graduation, which was quite a treat. And we had leave for a few hours, so we were able to visit, and that was a special time. That was a good time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
To begin with, do you recall the name of the ship that you were on?
No, I don't.
When you were doing the amphibian training.
Yeah, I don't remember.
Okay.
Troop ship of some sort, but I don't remember.
Was there an APA, a personnel attack ship?
There were a lot of soldiers aboard ship. I don't know the exact number, but certainly several hundred. And I recall that our sleeping quarters were hammocks, and they were 3 high from the floor. Quite hot in there. And I remember one night that I was in the top hammock, and I remember one night that the heat was just unbearable in the ship, and so I climbed down and I went topside, and I don't believe this was probably what you're supposed to do. And I crawled under a tarp and spent the night aboard ship, and it rained a little bit, but it was quite comfortable. And then early in the morning I went back down and climbed in the hammock. I only did that one night because the other nights weren't that hot, but that one night was quite unbearable.
So after the service then, Ray, after you had gotten out, you also that same month in December of '68, you graduated from veterinary college.
Yes.
As a DVM, or Doctor of Veterinary Medicine.
Yes.
Let me just back up a little bit as far as your time in the service. Did you make any long-term friendships with those that you served with, particularly with the Kalamazoo Engineering Company?
Yes. There were a couple friends that I had. Actually, I had a brother-in-law that also was in the unit. Of course, I've maintained contact with him. But I had a couple friends that we had moved away from Kalamazoo during my schooling, so that we would come back to Kalamazoo and stay with relatives when we would have maneuvers with the reserve unit. So I didn't get to see many of these people outside of the time in the reserve unit, because they lived in Kalamazoo area, and then I was at that point in East Lansing going to school. But Big Log Lowy was the name of one fella. I couldn't tell you the spelling. Sokowski was another one. And another one, his last name was Keith. So they were good friends that we would, when we'd had a break in our training, we would sit together, you know, and chow and those types of things. But no long-lasting friendships that I've been able to sustain to this day or afterwards. Did you join any veterans organizations? Did not join any veterans organizations, no. I do support, I'm, of course, lean towards military, so I do have some military charities that I maintain donations to.
Let me ask you about your Christian faith and how that might have helped you through your initial training and you know, throughout your time in the service.
Well, my Christian faith did not have a lot to do with my time in the Marine Corps as far as basic training is concerned. I was searching at that point in time in my life and didn't have that established. Ironically, one of my first guard duty assignments was I can't remember if it was 4 or 6 hours on Easter for the church on base during the evening. Gave me a lot of time to reflect and think. But it was later than that that my Christian faith really developed. And that had to do with the death of my father and searching. I would say, though, there was certainly opportunity within boot camp. I mean, they were very respectful and gave time off on Sundays for the different Marines to attend the church.
I see. How did your experience with the military influence your thinking about war and about the military in general? Any particular thoughts there?
Yes. I considered very strongly going back into the military after my graduation from veterinary school, because the Air Force and the Army both come and interview graduating veterinarians to try to encourage some of us to come into their veterinary corps. And I considered that very strongly, except there were just so many things happening at the time. My wife was expecting, We were monetarily in the hole and needed to make some quick changes in that area, and I needed to get to work right away. And the nearest opportunity I had from work was not in the Grand Rapids area. It was going to be in Indianapolis. And I knew if I re-upped with the reserves or went into the military, I wasn't sure how all that was going to work out as far as my family was concerned. So I decided not to do it at that time, with possibly doing it later on, which never happened.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as the military is concerned, I'm very positive about it. In fact, I think we should have the draft again to help some of these millennials have a better concept of what it means to support your nation. But I felt that many of the things I learned as far as character is concerned in boot camp and in the Marine Corps stood me in very good stead throughout school and indeed throughout my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very favored by the military.
Have you attended any reunions, either basic training reunions or other reunions for the reserves?
I'm sorry?
Have you attended any military reunions?
Yeah. No, I have not.
Okay. Ray, after the Marine Corps and after graduation from veterinary school, where did you first start to work?
I first started to work, of course, I went to school at Michigan State University, so I was East Grand Rapids, Michigan. And then the first position that I took was in Indianapolis, Indiana, actually just a little east of that, little town called Knightstown.
Oh,
That's
yes.
the name of that. And that was a mixed animal practice, so I did a lot of large animals, a lot of cattle, a lot of hogs, horses, as well as small animal. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't really sure if I wanted to become more specific in my classification as far as the number of animals and types of animals I wanted to treat. So later on I moved up to a small animal practice in Elkhart, Indiana.
How long were you there at Knightstown?
1 year.
1 year, okay. And then to Elkhart?
Then I went up to Elkhart, Indiana, which was just a small animal practice, but he did a lot more with the small animals than the other practice had. And he was far more equipped to do a lot of more involved surgeries. And essentially, he was a very good surgeon and taught me quite a bit. And essentially, that was a surgical residency for 3 years, a little over 3 years. Learned a lot, decided that I was going to stay in small animals and horse work. I enjoyed the horse work quite a bit. So then we moved up to Ada, a suburb of Grand Rapids, back into Michigan. And for about the first 10 years, I did small animals and horses, was what I worked with. And then gradually phased back into just small animal because the dynamics of the area changed. Far fewer horses in the area, and so it became, and in the meantime the small animal was increasing, so I just went with small animal from then on.
Did you start your own practice in Ada?
Yes, I did.
When you arrived there?
Did some exotics, worked on some snakes. And
what is the name of your practice?
Foreign Woods Veterinary Clinic.
Okay. And I understand your son is
My son manages that
in the
now,
business?
yes. And at the time, I had a little bit of a different vision for veterinary medicine. At the time, it was customary to open a small animal practice inside the city, within the city limits, or at least in an urban area. Mm-hmm. And I didn't wish to do that. So we purchased 26 acres in Ada, and I decided to have kind of, instead of people driving into town, they would come out into the country. So there had been a large dairy farm there, and we improved the barn and kind of left it as a symbol of the area. We covered it with metal and everything so that it was in good shape. And had my veterinary office right in there. We also did boarding, we did grooming, and provided complete veterinary care so people could come there. And it was aesthetic setting, a farm situation. Mm-hmm. And so The practice did very well.
When did your son become involved in the business?
My son became involved in 2008.
What is his name?
His name is Keith.
Keith. Okay. Keith Leali.
Yes. And he's not a veterinarian. He's a chemist by BA degree, a BS degree from Michigan State, and also he has a master's degree in business management.
I see.
So he does a very good job managing the practice.
Well, that's interesting. At least you can have other family members involved in the business.
Yes. That's a great joy to my wife and I.
I can imagine. In addition to your son, Keith, I understand you also have a daughter.
Yes. Her name is Kelly, Kellie. She is 3 years younger than my son. She was born in 72. He was born in 69.
I see.
And she lives here in Grand Rapids. She has a degree in bioscience.
Okay. Well, Ray, I want to thank you for sharing your recollections of military service in the U.S. Marine Corps with us. This interview is being conducted under the auspices of the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., and also through the History Department at Grand Valley State University, Allendale, Michigan. And we have been conducting this interview of Raymond Leali, who served in the U.S. Marine Corps Reserve and also had an interesting career as a Doctor of Veterinary Medicine. Thank you, Ray.
Yes, thank you.
Ray, we're going to be looking at documents, a document, and a couple of photographs here. What is this document then?
That would be my honorable discharge from the Marine Corps.
And that was the end of your, at the end of your 6 years service, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Ray, when was this picture taken?
That would have been taken in June of 1963. That was the graduation from boot camp. My parents and the young lady that was going to be my fiancée traveled from Michigan to Parris Island, South Carolina to be there for my graduation from boot camp.
I see. And this is you and this is Maryland, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. When was this photograph taken then, Ray? Of you and your blues?
I smile at that one just a little bit because that was probably taken within the first week of boot camp, and put all that on, all the blues on us, and or part of them, the upper part, and then we were told to smile. I wasn't really in a smiling mood at that point in time, but I was ordered to smile, so I smiled.
So you did.
Yeah, that would have been about the first week, sometime during the first week of boot camp.
I see. Here's a newspaper. Where did this article come from then, Ray?
That was in a newspaper in Maywood, Illinois. I believe my grandparents or one of my uncles put that in during my infantry training after I graduated from boot camp.
I see. Well, this is the end of the photograph log. And Ray, I want to thank you for participating in the Veterans History Project. And I, as interviewer, am Wallace Erickson. And this is October 30, 2018. I've been talking with Ray Leali about his former Marine Corps service.
Thank you very much.
The Veterans History Project.
Thank you. It's interesting.